also with a former TikTok CEO. You're the COO of ByteDance as well. And it blows my mind to think that it was August 2020 when you resigned because you couldn't see a path forward of managing TikTok globally. 5 years later, here we are, Kevin. What do you make of this potential deal?
Well, here we are. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Look, I think Kurt did a good job of describing the deal. I think it works operationally. I think having a company like Oracle, a very trusted company run by Larry Ellison, who's a trustworthy figure, obviously, being in the center, in charge of looking after and securing that U.S. data, that's crucial. And I think they're licensing the algorithm from China, so ByteDance will still own the code, but I do think this license will take another instance of the algorithm, all the code, put on Oracle servers, and then trained on the US data that Oracle alone has access to. So I think it's going to end up having a vastly different feed and sort of content algorithm than you'll see around the world. So I think that will work. And I think that ByteDance will, is now below 20% ownership, 19.9% ownership. That's a substantial difference from status quo. And I do think that ByteDance has an operational role commercializing TikTok, selling ads, making sure e-commerce works and all the other commercialization factors. But really, it will be run by a U.S. board and it'd be a separate U.S. company.
Kevin,
it works.
It works, but the proof is in the pudding as to whether the algorithm is as powerful. How do you see, as someone who's in charge of content development and wanting to get your content out there in a marketing capacity, do you have confidence that it will be as good without ByteDance as heavily involved?
Well, I think it probably will be. There's a lot of intricacies and a lot of AI, that's the word of the day, in that code. And I think that code base being kept intact is crucial. I think had they tried to recreate a new algorithm from scratch because of security concerns, that would have been exceedingly difficult. That has taken years and years and thousands of engineers in China to develop this very sophisticated AI recommendation engine. So the fact that they'll have access to that, it will remain interoperable with all the other TikTok instances around the world. I think that matters quite a bit. And I think just retraining that same code base, that same algorithm with US data should provide a very robust solution. I think it will be seamless. I'm
really interested in that interoperability, because as someone who can see the power of TikTok, because you are able to get global content, not just US focused content, is that really going to work? Is that something that you think will it still remain a global business, even though you're having this US part hived off?
It has to. It has to remain global. I think a social media platform, and I would call TikTok more social entertainment actually than social media, that has to be global. If it were to be siphoned off and cordoned off from the rest of the world and having a US only presence, I think that would be a big detriment to US users. As I understand it, that's not the case. It is interoperable. And I think from a user perspective, be seamlessly accessing content from around the world and vice versa. It's the recommendation that will be US based only.
I mean, you just think about the entertainment element. I mean, TikTok had its first red carpet moment yesterday doing awards. I mean, this really is trying to be a juggernaut of the way you and I consume our content going forward. Just from the national security perspective, how do you think that has been silenced in terms of criticism? Because many feel that perhaps ByteDance still has a bit too much involvement, particularly if it gets some profits as well.
Well, I think ByteDance deriving profits, they're due that. I mean, they built this entire ecosystem, this entire code base, the technology, the app. They paid a lot of money in marketing to get that app downloaded on hundreds of millions, billions, frankly, of devices around the world. They've earned that right to have a participation in profits. And I think it's structured in such a way that's very fair. And I do think that from a national security perspective, again, having that data walled off, making sure that that our potential adversaries outside of the US cannot access the algorithm again, how that algorithm recommends content moderation policies, and the actual data underneath it that drives the training of that algorithm, the fact that that is controlled by Oracle. It is like Project Texas, but I think Project Texas would have worked as well. So I think this is going to solve the whatever legitimate national security concerns there were, now solved.
The consumer has kind of cared less and less. Since the first ruling, since that first under the Biden administration desire to block to block TikTok, or at least separating them from ByteDance, initially people were really worried about the national security element, and now it seems that has faded. Do you think consumers are going to be interested in what they're now presented in terms of the algorithm. It's so interesting. I now get a STEM element in TikTok. They've already tried to confront that feeling that we're being dumbed down versus perhaps what they're being served by the competition in China.
Yeah, look, I think it's all just pretty good news. I think that Americans will be well served by having another voice, another platform. I think Americans speaking to Americans on this platform, and Americans speaking to the world and the world back to us is healthy. It's a healthy dialogue to have. I think that if it's done in a way that is protecting our interests, that's protecting our security, I think that's very good news for consumers here, and I think they'll be well served. So I think it's correct that consumers should have now put this in the back of their mind a little bit. This seems like a permanent solution. The only element of doubt here and risk is that China hasn't come out and explicitly, the Chinese government hasn't blessed the deal yet. I'd be a little concerned about that. You know, back 5 years ago, we almost had a deal with Oracle, you may recall, and the Chinese government put an end to it. It looks like, by all accounts, in the Chinese media, the right words are being said today and then in the last few days about the deal. Looks good. Looks like China will approve it. Last little fly in the ointment, but again, wouldn't be too concerned about it. Looks like it's going to happen.
You're at the very cutting edge of where media is moving to. You're sort of the lead architect behind Disney Plus and how it was unveiled. You're now thinking about new areas of brands, and you're helping CoComelon get everywhere in a cameo for kids, for example. What is TikTok in terms of its competition? Because we're also considering a totally different media landscape. We're thinking about whether a Netflix owning a Warner Brothers would be the real competition. Is YouTube, is the real competition TikTok? How do you see this evolution right now?
Well, there's a lot going on in the media business now. It looks a lot different than it did even 5 years ago. There's young people, and even people my age and across the demographic spectrum. People are watching more short form entertainment. That's something that TikTok well, in the beginning, YouTube, pioneered short form entertainment. It became full screen vertical with vertical phones when TikTok came along, and now YouTube is doing that with shorts. I think there is a sea change in how people consume content, where the influence comes from. I mean, if you look at today, the landscape and what's more central to the culture, is it Hollywood? Is it TikTok? Is it YouTube? The answer is it's a mix of all of the above. And as usage patterns continue to evolve, I think there's going to be some challenges for Hollywood to catch up. My company, Candle Media, we own a company called Moonbug, and you mentioned CoComelon. CoComelon is centered on IP derived from YouTube. It's on the YouTube ecosystem. We're on Shorts. We're on the traditional YouTube, video. And we have over 200 million subscribers to that one English language channel. And we've been the biggest show on Netflix. So I think there is taking advantage of all the different platforms that people interact with, streaming, paid streaming services, advertising supported streaming services, theatrical windows. We're having a CoComelon movie come out in 2027, and YouTube and TikTok at the center of that IP generation machine. That's the future of media, and media companies that are really at the cutting edge are really looking YouTube, TikTok, short form video alongside the long form traditional storytelling that has been their bread and butter for decades.
Do you have any anxiety for Hollywood, for IP, for content creation, if indeed Netflix does take ownership of Warner Brothers Discovery, if Paramount does, for that example, and indeed what it means for your old alma mater, which is Disney?
Well, Disney's in a great position. Disney has the IP, the franchises, they have the brands that matter. Disney, Star Wars, Marvel, Pixar. Disney's in a pretty unassailable position. Put them aside for a second. What Hollywood needs is a healthy ecosystem. They need studios that have enough revenue to cover their costs, that are profitable, and that are in a position to compete against these behemoths like TikTok, like YouTube and Google. So a combination there between Warner Brothers and one of Netflix or Paramount is crucial, I think, to maintain the health and the profitability of that ecosystem. It's better to have fewer competitors that are more financially viable and can buy more product and support a high production value than having more buyers, one more buyer being Warner Brothers independently in a weaker financial position. So I think that a combination is good. And even though Netflix won the first round, don't count out the Ellisons. They're incredibly smart and aggressive. Don't count out Jerry Cardinale at Redbird. These guys are very serious. I think they're going to come back with a higher bid. And when they approach, and remember, shareholders still haven't spoken yet. I think the likelihood here is that Warner Brothers ends up with Paramount. And I think it's ultimately, it's going to cost some jobs, obviously, in Hollywood. There's no getting around that, but ultimately good for creators.